10 years ago, I could not have imagined that I'd be telling my story to such a distinguished group. I want to thank my dear friend Marnie Pakin for suggesting me as a speaker. I was introduced to Marnie and Larry Pakin within the first week of our moving to Hamilton from New York City. That was in August of 2005. Not only have they been great friends ever since, but they also have been my mentors and supporters who tirelessly championed our ideas, introduced us to the right people, and as a result were essential players in helping us to get our organization off the ground. I'm truly honored and humbled to join the impressive roster of accomplished speakers that you have featured in the past, and I'm thrilled and excited to share with you my story, the story of the Hamilton Music Collective, the organization I founded in 2008. And of course the program that we're most known for, the An Instrument for Every Child program. The timing for this talk is excellent because this is a feel-good story. It involves two of the most beautiful things in life, children and music. I'm sure you agree with me, we all need this right now, during these difficult times where the never-ending onslaught of bad news, much of which involves children, has a significant impact on our mental health and well-being. Following is a brief overview on what I will be talking about today. I will start by giving you some background on myself, the role music has played in my life, and I will share with you my motivation and what was the catalyst to start this organization and the An Instrument for Every Child program. I will provide some background on our organization, the Hamilton Music Collective. And of course, I will talk about the program itself, how it works, and how over the course of the past 12 years it has evolved. And lastly, and most importantly, I want to talk about the impact that our work in the community has on the lives of the participating children and their families, and the impact that our work has on the community as a whole. Music is a thread that has run through my entire life. I grew up in Germany and I was lucky to have a supportive family that allowed me to experiment with a variety of musical instruments until I found my instrument, the tenor saxophone. I discovered jazz in my teenage years, a natural progression given my choice of instrument. I went on to study music at the Folkwang Conservatory in Essen and received my bachelor's and master's degree in jazz performance and composition. During that time, while I was a student, I had a dream to move to New York City and to study with one of the saxophone masters. For those of you who have an interest in jazz, I'm referring to the saxophone legends that were still alive at that time and living in New York, like Stanley Turrentine or Lee Konitz or Wayne Shorter. But then life happened, and instead of ending up in New York City, I ended up in the Canadian Rockies. I was the lucky recipient of a scholarship for the Banff International Workshop in Jazz and Creative Music, which was one of the most important international training grounds for jazz musicians and composers. My time in Banff was in many ways a life-changing experience, most importantly because that's where I met my future husband and former Hamiltonian, Astrid Hepner, who at that time was the department head and founder of the Selkirk College Music Program in Nelson, BC. I'm sure that some of you may know his parents, Lee and Patricia Hepner, who were both prominent and accomplished members of the Hamilton music community. Lee was the conductor of the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra and a music professor at McMaster University, and Pat was the founder of the Moore College Music Program. Fast forward a couple of years, we were married in Cologne, Germany in 1996, where I had just finished an additional degree in cultural management, and then we moved to New York City. So my dream to live and work in New York City, after all, did come true. During my first couple of years in New York, I was still active as a performing musician and had some amazing musical opportunities, such as performing with Latin music legends Tito Puente and Celia Cruz at an epic Latin music festival at Lincoln Center that featured many of the stars of the great Palladium Ballroom era of the 50s. I was also leading my own band called Astrid Hepner and Funkmeister, and we performed in clubs all over the city. Our drummer, Keith Carlock, ended up having an impressive career and is now performing and recording with the likes of James Taylor and Steely Dan and Sting and John Mayer. However, my circadian rhythm was not conducive to the life of a jazz performer, as I like to get up early and go to bed early. That put me on my new career path in the recording industry that led to many exciting opportunities, working at major record labels in New York. My lucky career break was to get a job at Blue Note Records, as the executive assistant to Bruce Landwell, the former CEO of this iconic jazz label, who was one of the music industry's most notable and respected figures. I had the privilege of working with some of the greatest artists of our time: Norah Jones, Wynton Marsalis, Van Morrison, Sir Simon Rattle, Al Green, Anita Baker, and the list goes on. During my years at Blue Note, Bruce Landwell was my mentor and a great friend. Throughout my entire life, I've been immersed in music, the creation of it, the performing of it, the teaching and marketing of it. It is this diverse and eclectic career path as a performer, educator, and music executive that gave me the foundation and experience to start my own organization, the Hamilton Music Collective. In 2005, we decided to leave New York City. At that point, we had a 2-year-old daughter who we wanted to grow up in a house with a garden and a bicycle and a dog. These are reasonable goals for a young family, however extremely elusive goals when you live in New York City. That said, our daughter did have the privilege to meet some of the greatest artists in jazz and charm Miles Davis bass player Ron Carter at a party. Also, having lived very closely through the horror of 9/11, I was in the Blue Note office just 20 blocks from the World Trade Center when the second plane hit really impacted our perception of living in the city. What used to be an exciting and exhilarating place filled with arts and opportunities suddenly felt like a hostile and dangerous place that we did not want our daughter to grow up in. When a job opened in the music program at Moore College, my husband Darcy was quick to apply. He got the job. We packed all of our belongings and our daughter into a big truck and left our life in New York City behind. Hamilton, 2005. Music is a connector. When you arrive in a new town and you don't know anyone, as was the case for me when we moved to Hamilton, and social beings that we are, we try to find ways to connect with our new community in our new home. And for me, besides meeting other mothers on the playground or at our daughter's Montessori school, that connector was music, as it always has been throughout my life. This brings me back to Marnie and Larry Pagan. Two exceptional people, tireless champions of the local arts community, known for their many generous contributions to countless arts and cultural organizations in Hamilton. I am so grateful the Hamilton Music Collective was one of them. At the time of our arrival in Hamilton, Larry was the member of a committee called the Steeltown Friends of Moore Music, a group of music lovers dedicated to raising funds for the Moore College music program, which my husband was a part of. So they invited us to their home just after we arrived in Hamilton, where we were introduced to Bob Miller, a former street executive and chair of this committee who was also a passionate jazz lover. I immediately knew that we were in good company. Bob has been the chair of the Hamilton Music Collective Board of Directors since 2009. Moving to Hamilton after spending close to a decade in New York City was a bit of a culture shock for me. While in the beginning I enjoyed having more time for my family after years of working in a high-pressure corporate environment, there were certain components of my former life that were missing. I was missing the excitement of being part of a creative community. I was missing the excitement of going to see the kind of high-quality music performances that are usually not part of the cultural landscape of a smaller community. So we decided to bring a little bit of our New York City to Hamilton. I think it was in January 2008 that my husband decided to form a big band with his former musician buddies from when he was growing up in Hamilton in the 70s, many of whom by 2008, like Darcy, had developed impressive musical careers and were some of the top musicians in the country. I should mention that while I was working in the New York music industry, Darcy was enjoying his own musical career, performing and recording and touring with artists like Blood, Sweat and Tears, The Temptations, Buster Poindexter, and playing Broadway shows. January is usually a slow month for musicians, so the idea to come together as a band on a weekly basis to play the music of Thad Jones, which is fun and challenging at the same time, was met with a lot of enthusiasm. And so the Darcy Hepner Jazz Orchestra was formed, of which I was a member. He made an arrangement with the Corktown Pub in Hamilton for the band to perform 3 consecutive performances, each Wednesday night in January 2008. Long story short, what was supposed to be a 3-week run turned into a highly successful concert series with over 150 performances over the next 3 years. The fact that a big band playing the music of Thad Jones would last so long and week after week performed in front of a full house in a place that used to be a former punk dive became quite a phenomenon that actually got us 2 Hamilton Tourism Awards. We had guest soloists from New York City's most prestigious big bands, the Village Vanguard Jazz Orchestra and the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, come to perform with the band. The late great Lincoln Alexander, a huge jazz fan himself, was in the audience almost every week.
I haven't forgotten the beat and the rhythm and the beat and the sound. And so I want everybody to know that they're welcome at Corkstown. I think we should underscore that. Because
I think we should too.
Underscore it. Everybody, Lincoln Alexander, former governor, says we should come in and hear the sound.
It was an incredibly exciting time because we had the best of both worlds. Every week we got to perform with some of the country's top musicians in front of a very appreciative audience, just a 5-minute drive away from our house and our daughter. At the same time, I was working on 2 other initiatives that eventually led to the formation of the Hamilton Music Collective. The first one was a photo exhibition called Hamilton, New York, Portraits of Sound, for which we invited New York City-based photographer and friend Jimmy Katz, whom I knew from my time at Blue Note Records, to Hamilton to take portraits of prominent Hamilton musicians, including Tom Wilson, Teenage Head, Boris Brott, Diana Penton, Jackie Washington, and Harrison Kennedy. Jimmy has an international reputation in the art and music world for his distinct portraits of musicians, and we were so thrilled to see this exhibition featured at the Art Gallery Hamilton, with local artists being portrayed alongside his well-known photographs of artists such as Yo-Yo Ma, Sting, B.B. King, Tony Bennett, and Ray Charles. The second initiative that we had started around the same time was an educational outreach event involving members of the Astrid Hepner Jazz Orchestra and students of Moore College. The initiative was called Jazz in the Hubs and was made possible with funding received through the Hamilton Community Foundation. It was the success of this educational project, presented in some of Hamilton's highest need elementary schools, that became the catalyst to found the Hamilton Music Collective and to expand and build on the amazing experience we had bringing music into schools in some of Hamilton's most challenged neighborhoods. Jazz in the Hubs was a fun and impactful project that we ended up running for 4 years in priority schools all over the city, many of which later became partner schools in our AIFEC program. The initiative included members of the Mohawk Music Program student big band and professors of the music faculty. A typical Jazz in the Hubs event looked like this. We'd arrive at the school early in the morning, where we would set up for a big band performance, usually in the gym. Throughout the space, we set up musical instrument stations divided into different instrument groups, such as trombones, trumpets, percussion instruments, violins, etc. Around 9 or 10 o'clock, with the ring of the school bell, a group of 60 to 100 super excited, chatting, giggling school children would enter the room. After we were introduced and welcomed by the principal, the student big band performed a brief 20-minute set, during which the various instruments of a big band were demonstrated in a fun and interactive way. For example, during a song, the soloists would get up from their chair and make their way through the crowd while playing, sometimes bending down, to honk directly into a child's face, which was always met with great laughter. Sometimes we would have a vocalist in the band who would scat a phrase into the microphone and then had kids repeat after her. Needless to say, the children just loved the performances. But it didn't end there. The best part was about to happen. That was the moment when they got to touch and try all the instruments they had just seen themselves. Small student groups were formed that rotated from table to table so that every child got the chance to play all these cool musical instruments, guided by students of the Mohawk music program. I will never forget one moment at Adelaide Hoodless School. Someone from the Hamilton Spectator was present to report on the event and interviewed some of the kids. There was this tiny boy, maybe 10 years old, who had just managed to get a huge sound out of a trombone. When asked by the reporter how it made him feel to create this awesome sound, he answered in this raspy voice that I will never forget and said, "It made me feel alive." What a powerful statement coming from a 10-year-old. At that point, we knew we were onto something, and we realized that there was a real need for what we did. We witnessed the excitement that providing these hands-on musical experiences created, and we realized that this was an opportunity that we had to build and expand on. Because what good does it do to get a child excited about something knowing that mom and dad would never be able to afford costly music or instrumental education? I have to admit that until that point, child poverty was not really a topic on the forefront of things I worried about. In New York City, I was a career-focused person trying to move up the corporate ladder. And my first couple of years in Hamilton were spent enjoying the domestic bliss of being a stay-at-home mom for the first time since our daughter was born. However, spending a lot of time in schools in some of the most challenged neighborhoods in our city, meeting the children and speaking with principals and teachers, opened my eyes to the enormous and heartbreaking number of children and families living in poverty in Hamilton. And I experienced firsthand the impact that music and exposure to all these magical, shiny instruments, each one of them opening up a new world of sounds and opportunities, had on these children. Around the same time, Bob Miller, whom I met through Larry Pakin, introduced me to his friend Paul Lloyd, a successful local businessman and owner of Password Securities. Paul grew up in East Hamilton as a child of a single mother, and he experienced firsthand the hardships of growing up in a low-income household. Music was his passion, and still is, and playing drums in a band throughout his teenage years kept him, in his own words, out of trouble. His band buddies, later all successful businessmen, were lifelong friends. When one of them was diagnosed with terminal cancer, they promised him that they would launch an initiative that would provide children whose families could not afford it with musical instruments. Paul was also one of our sponsors for the Portraits of Sound photo exhibition. In one of our meetings, he mentioned that he would like to plant the seed for an idea that was very close to his heart. He said, "If you ever come up with a project or program that puts musical instruments in the hands of Hamilton's underserved children, this is something I'd really like to support with a substantial donation." Bob, Paul and I had lunch, and at that lunch he pledged $125,000 over the course of 5 years as seed funding for me to start a program that would do exactly that. And that's when the Hamilton Music Collective became incorporated as a non-for-profit. Not only has Paul been our founding sponsor, but he's still an active member on our board of directors and a dear friend who has donated close to $500,000 since the launch of the An Instrument for Every Child program. I spent the following weeks researching music programs all over the world that had one thing in common. They were all inspired by a music education initiative called El Sistema, which was founded in Venezuela in 1975 by Venezuelan educator, musician and activist José Antonio Abreu. The motto of El Sistema was Music for Social Change, and the program provided, quote, free classical music education that promotes human opportunity and development for impoverished children. It is an orchestral program that engages its students for hours every day in order to keep them off the streets. It is truly the choice between drugs and violence or cellos and violins. Over the years, El Sistema has changed the lives of hundreds of thousands of children and youth living in extreme poverty. Gustavo Dudamel, the conductor of the LA Philharmonic, was a prodigy of this program. Here's a quote of El Sistema founder Abreu that beautifully articulates what we are still aspiring to accomplish every day. Music has to be recognized as an agent of social development in the highest sense because it transmits the highest values: solidarity, harmony, mutual compassion. And it has the ability to unite an entire community and to express sublime feelings. Fortunately, these extreme life and death situations found in the slums in Venezuela are not the norm in our community. In researching El Sistema-inspired programs, I came across an initiative in Germany called Yiki, which stands for Jedem Kind ein Instrument, and translates into an instrument for every child. This program fit Hamilton's demographic perfectly because there were so many similarities between Hamilton and the German city Bochum, located in the Ruhr region, where the program originated from. The Ruhr region used to be the heart of Germany's coal and steel industry and was considered by many to be the driving force behind the German economic miracle. However, at the beginning of the 21st century, it was one of the country's poorest areas. Unemployment was at 11%, and among children from the many immigrant families living in this area, the poverty rate was at 44%. It was actually my mother, who lives in Germany and with whom I had shared our successes with the Jazz in the Hubs program, who in one of her letters sent me a newspaper clipping about this unique music education initiative, as it reminded her of what we were doing in Hamilton. I was intrigued. The key concept that made Yiki so impactful was its integration into the elementary school system. It had started with 3 schools and 100 students in 2003. By 2008, the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia supported Yiki with approximately 8.7 million euro annually. By 2015, over 40 communities, 50 music schools, 600 elementary schools, and approximately 60,000 children participated in the Yiki program. It was the brainchild of Manfred Grunenberg, a music school director who was inspired by a campaign run by Dell Computer called A Computer for Every Child, which prompted him, a passionate music educator, to ask the reasonable question, why not an instrument for every child? I reached out to Mr. Grunenberg, who was equally intrigued by the idea that the news about the program he started had made it all the way to Canada. On my next trip to Germany, we scheduled a meeting where I met Manfred and his entire team. We talked for hours, and he was incredibly forthcoming about the program's inner workings, its challenges, financials, and logistical details. We talked about fundraising, child-sized instruments, and how to get the program into the schools. In short, I found the most cooperative, supportive, and experienced group of people that was excited about the idea of supporting us in launching the program in Hamilton. An Instrument for Every Child Hamilton was about to be launched. Manfred remained my mentor and advisor until he retired a few years ago. I returned to Hamilton with a suitcase filled with supportive documents, research papers, lesson plans, financial statements, and all sorts of useful information that we would benefit from for years to come. I was excited and determined to bring this fantastic and unique program to Hamilton. What followed was a year of preparation, the creation of numerous proposals, countless meetings with executives and school board superintendents, potential sponsors, local politicians, and community leaders, until finally, in 2010, we were ready to launch our first AIFEC class at King George Elementary School in East Hamilton. It helped that one of our board members knew the school's principal, Rita Knapp, and it was the incredible support of Rita and her wonderful staff that made the launch of AIFEC so successful. Let me tell you how the program works. As I already mentioned, the key concept of AIFEC is that it takes place in schools during school hours, which makes it inherently barrier-free, accessible and inclusive. Because every child attends school regardless of their social economic status, race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, and gender. These important characteristics, to be barrier-free, accessible and inclusive, still represent the fundamental mandate of everything we do today. Here it is important to mention that what follows describes the pre-pandemic version of the program. Later, I will talk about how we adjusted all of our programming immediately after the first lockdown took place in March 2020. The core program starts with a Grade 1 introductory class taught by an AIFEC instructor in tandem with the classroom teacher. It is a weekly class where students learn about basic musical elements such as beat, rhythm, and notation, and where they develop musical literacy through singing, playing, moving, performing, and listening actively. They will make connections with the role of music in their lives and will be introduced to a variety of musical styles from around the world. And they will also be introduced to a variety of musical instruments throughout the school year. Guest musicians are invited into the classroom on a regular basis for interactive demonstrations of the various instrument groups. Students also learn to use and care for musical instruments properly, become familiar with acceptable audience behavior, and develop the ability to work cooperatively with others. In the second year, Grade 2, students choose the musical instrument that they want to play. They receive free weekly instrumental lessons by professional musicians on an instrument of their choice, which we provide on a free loan basis for the next 3 years, Grade 2, 3, and 4. Depending on the space available in partner schools, these lessons take place either during regular school hours or as an after-school program in nearby community centers. Let me summarize the program's highlights. It targets under-resourced youth in high-need schools. It offers free, high-quality music instruction. It invests in students at a critical point in their development. It removes barriers by being fully integrated into elementary schools in low-income and at-risk areas. It provides each participant with his or her own instrument free of charge for the duration of the program. At the end of each school year, the program concludes with a performance where students share their accomplishments with their peers, teachers, and families. Our pilot year at King George Elementary School turned out to be a huge success. Having conquered the most challenging hurdle, which was to convince the school board of the viability of our program, finally launching our first Grade 1 AIFEC class seemed like a breeze. Understandably, it was a considerable commitment for the school board to integrate a third-party group into their school schedule on a regular basis. However, once they saw the program in action, it did not take long for word to spread throughout the educational community about this unique new music project that was happening at King George Elementary School. What further supported our cause was the wealth of scientific research over the last decade that had proved that music education is a powerful tool for attaining children's full intellectual, social, and creative potential. It was found that music education speeds the development of speech and reading skills, enhances focus, and builds a sense of empathy for others. In addition, music lessons and playing an instrument gives children a means to express themselves, which for many is key to emotional stability. The AIFEC program also addresses the continued erosion of music education with emphasis on inner city schools where the daily challenges of families preclude the ability to provide music lessons. Throughout our pilot year, we developed a comprehensive communication, marketing, and media strategy to share with all of our stakeholders, parents, politicians, potential sponsors, the students' excitement and enthusiasm that we experienced in our weekly AIFEC classroom. Students in our first Grade 1 class were exposed to at least 12 to 14 guest artists, including members of the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra, a local sitar master, professors from the Morg music program, and young, talented music students, some barely older than our students themselves. At the end of Grade 1, these students had an impressive understanding of musical instrument groups and a solid foundation of musical concepts that prepared them to pick an instrument of their choice and start lessons taught by qualified artist teachers in small groups at their school in Grade 2. The pilot year ended with a big celebration. Canadian Idol winner Brian Mello performed for the excited audience, and the Grade 1 students' performance of the AIFEC song was the highlight of the evening. Speeches praising the initiative were delivered by the public board's Superintendent Judith Bishop, then Mayor Bob Patina, and Dofasco Executive Bob Savage, who also presented us with a check from Dofasco for $10,000. Growing pains and fundraising. In 2011, we added 2 additional schools to our roster of partner schools, Holy Name of Jesus School and Kathy Weaver, both high-need schools that were thrilled to be able to provide their students with this opportunity. Now both boards, public and separate, were our official community partners. By the end of 2011, our initiative started to generate a fair amount of media attention. We were featured on the front page of the Hamilton Spectator, and local TV stations would often come into our classrooms or film students' concerts to profile our organization and the AIFEC program. It was the positive and uplifting message inherent to the concept of providing those children with musical opportunities that otherwise would not be accessible to them that ultimately resulted in the incredible support the project received and that allowed us to grow the program where it is today. In 2012, Hamilton musician Tom Wilson and a group of local business owners on Lock Street launched their popular concert series Live on Lock in support of the AIFEC program. The concert series ran for several years and raised over $100,000. The Ontario Trillium Foundation became our first government donor, 2011, and we began to receive substantial grants by other foundations, including the Hamilton Community Foundation, the Insight Foundation for the Arts, and TD Community Giving. By 2014, we were offering AIFEC in 7 inner-city schools, and about 450 students were receiving free weekly instrumental and music instruction. We had received a grant to purchase enough musical instruments to provide all of our students with their instruments of choice. However, what sounds like a beautiful success story on paper did not come without its challenges in real life. At that point, I was still running the program from the dining room table in our house. The exponential nature of the concept, 1 grade 1 class turns into 4 instrumental group classes in grade 2, 3 and 4, with a new grade 1 class starting with each new school year, resulted in a rapid program expansion that needed to be financed. Transfer this growth rate to 7 schools and you will appreciate the financial pressure I found myself in to sustain this rapid growth. Mind you, at that point I had the support of a formidable board of directors, comprised of prominent business people, educators, lawyers, and marketing specialists. However, I was the one creating the budgets, and more than one time I'd say to my husband, I don't know how much longer I can do this. The ongoing pressure to raise funds, grow and expand, because that's what funders expected us to do, was getting to a point that I often found myself awake at night worrying about how to feed the albeit lovely monster that I had created. In 2014, after one of those hours-long number-crunching sessions, trying to make it all work, a feeling of dread about how to finance the upcoming year started creeping up on me. I wasn't sure if we had enough funding to continue and properly compensate our growing team of instructors. We also had a citywide and costly awareness and advertising campaign scheduled, which was about to be launched in bus shelters all over the city. I was wondering if that was the best way to spend our money, and overwhelmed by worry, I was close to calling it all off. However, there was this voice in my head that kept saying, you can't just give up now. What about the children that were so excited about their lessons? And what about the instructors who had invested so much time into their students? So I decided to go ahead with this bold campaign, even if the message of confidence and success that the images portrayed did not reflect my inner state of mind at all. I was full of self-doubts and somewhat at a loss as to how to deliver what we had promised to our community. More schools, more children, more instruments. The campaign caught the eye of Carl Josie, the son of the late John and Ellie Wortman, who also was the president of the John and Ellie Wortman Charitable Foundation. He had just recently purchased a historic building on Park Street North in downtown Hamilton, known as the Gasworks, and originally built by the Hamilton Gas Light Company to fuel streetlights and homes. His intention was to fuel arts education and community instead, by transforming the building into a community center. I was introduced to Carl by local music producer Trevor Titian, and we knew right there and then that this was a partnership that was destined to be. Carl said in this meeting, "You are doing exactly what I had envisioned for the building, and you are doing it so well, so rather than us reinventing the wheel, I want to offer you our building so that your programs will be available to even more children and youth in downtown Hamilton." Not only did we finally have an office space, but the building also came with a performance space, rehearsal space, and storage space for all of our instruments. Being invited by the Wortmann Foundation into this beautiful building to run and expand our programs was a complete game changer. Suddenly we had an impressive downtown presence. With that came more corporate sponsors who had heard about the Hamilton Music Collective and were impressed by what we had achieved in a relatively short time. We had only been around for 6 years at that point. Mars Homes, Red Hill Toyota, and Tier & Kern Architects came on board as multi-year sponsors. Our individual donor base continued to grow, and grassroots fundraising campaigns in support of AIFEC were organized by local musicians, other community organizations, and McMaster student groups. The City of Hamilton became a substantial annual funder, and multiple new partnerships were formed, including with the McMaster Institute for Music and the Mind, the city's recreation department, the Hamilton Boys and Girls Club, and the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra. We continued to expand into more high-need schools, while at the same time developing a whole new set of advanced programming at the Gasworks. These programs allow graduates from the AIFEC core program in schools to continue their musical journey in our own community center. Carl Josie, the president of the Wortmann Foundation, was thrilled to see the building blossom with HMC as a tenant. This prompted him to dream even bigger. Knowing that our inner city was a place of hope but also hardship, of progress but also poverty, they believed in the HMC mission to the point that in 2017 they decided to fund the building's revitalization and expansion as well. To help realize the foundation and the HMC's joint vision, they turned to Hamilton Tier & Kern Architects, who designed and oversaw the project. The result of this $3.7 million renovation is a state-of-the-art cultural center that is functional and beautiful, and it feels accessible without feeling institutional. In September 2020, HMC moved back into the newly renovated building. However, the pandemic and provincial restrictions limited the use of the facility. Classrooms were retrofitted with appropriate PPE, and we did run some classes, but most classes did not return until January 2022. As of today, we are offering over 15 additional programs, including an orchestra, a band program called the Jambassadors, a Music for Wellness program which uses songwriting to support the emotional wellness of youth, a music technology and production program, and also a monthly open jam for kids. And I'm very excited to share that this summer we are launching our Musical Future Summer Camp, a 4-week camp that will take place at the Gasworks. All these programs are inclusive and barrier-free. We offer subsidies and scholarships in a non-bureaucratic fashion to provide high-quality music education to all children and youth, regardless of their socio-economic circumstances. Let me tell you a little bit about how we managed to keep our programs going and stay connected with our students despite and throughout the pandemic. In March 2020, upon the announcement of the first lockdown, the entire admin and instructor team convened immediately to discuss the logistics of moving all of our instrumental instruction online. Within a month, close to 300 students were enrolled in online lessons. We provided all instrumental students with the instrument of their choice via safe home delivery or pickup at the Gasworks. We invested in support for instructors to help manage the ongoing challenges of online teaching. All grade 1 classes were taught via video delivery to all of our 17 partner schools. Online videos were created in partnership with the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra and used as teaching tools to introduce the instruments as part of the grade 1 introductory class. We concluded the past 2 school years with online end-of-the-year recitals with 200 students performing and peers and family members participating as an appreciative online audience all over Hamilton. Music is a universal language with the power to create connections and to positively transform lives. Never was this truer than in the past couple of years. It was the need for connection that guided our work during the pandemic and will continue to guide us for years to come. As an organization, we were incredibly lucky to have received the financial support that was required to keep our programs going despite the challenges that we were facing. It was because this support received by individual donors and significant foundational funding that we were able to continue to provide close to 500 students per year with high-quality music education. This month, we also restarted our celebrated concert series Jazz at the Gasworks, which features world-class musicians in our performance space with proceeds going back into our educational programming. Since the Hamilton Music Collective launched in 2010, we have provided over 9,000 children with free music instruction by professional musicians on the instrument of their choice. We have created sustained employment opportunities for local musicians. We've built strong partnerships with organizations throughout the city and beyond. Our program gives local musicians an opportunity to mentor young, diverse, aspiring performers while strengthening the Hamilton music industry and increasing community access to music experiences. Culture and art are a lifeblood for people. Culture and art are a lifeblood for a city. For children and adults, participating in cultural activities builds self-esteem and improves resilience, all of which supports educational outcomes. The HMC remains committed to providing opportunities for barrier-free, inclusive engagement in high-quality cultural activities with emphasis on neighborhoods that are economically challenged to build on Hamilton's commitment to the development of music and the arts. Thank you so much for listening. I want to end this performance with a brief video segment which is part of our weekly Student of the Week series. Enjoy.
Welcome to AIFEC's Student of the Week Spotlight. AIFEC has hundreds of students in all kinds of programs, and this weekly feature is a chance for us to highlight some very bright stars in our music community. My name is Natasha. I am so excited to introduce you to this wonderful young musician, Matthias. And this student has been chosen for this honor because he's been doing really well. All his songs are really getting better and better. Let's meet our star today, Matthias. How old are you?
7.
What is the most fun part of learning to play the piano?
Do songs and to know new songs.
Have you faced any challenges?
My fingers.
Okay. How did you get better at your fingers?
Practicing.
Mm-hmm. How does it make you feel to be chosen as the Student of the Week?
Happy.
What advice would you give new students who are just starting to learn the piano?
To help them and tell them to practice more.
Mm-hmm. Are you ready to play your song now?
Yes. The Good King, what's his face?
All right, we are ready. Awesome. That was incredible. Are there any last thoughts that you would like to share?
Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next Monday for our next installment. Until then, keep a song in your heart and make time to play. Bye.